Getting out of the weeds is one of the most common goals I hear from capable managers, directors, and even senior individual contributors. It is also one of the hardest transitions to make. Not because people don't understand delegation in theory, but because the weeds actually feel like you're being responsible. They feel safe. They feel like proof that you're adding value. And the thing is, for a long time, they are adding value. Earlier in your career, being in the weeds is exactly where you should be. You're learning, you're building competence, you're proving you can execute. But at some point, the role you're playing and the role you're being evaluated for stop being the same thing. And that's when staying in the weeds quietly becomes this liability that it was not before. The first thing to understand is that being in the weeds is rarely a time management problem. It's actually an identity problem. Most people stay in the weeds because that's where they feel confident. They know how to do the work. It's obvious. They can control the quality. They can fix things quickly. Leadership work, by contrast, feels exposed. It requires judgment instead of execution. It involves decisions that are based not just on tasks, but on trusting others and accepting outcomes that may be unknown. So people tell themselves they'll step back from the weeds once things settle down, not realizing that things never settle down. The weeds just keep on regenerating. So to get out of those weeds, you have to fundamentally disrupt how you are defining your role and the future that you envision for yourself. At higher levels, your value isn't measured by how much you personally produce. It's measured by how much your system produces. Your system might be a team, an agency, a function, a project, or a cross-functional initiative. But if outcomes depend primarily on your direct involvement, you won't actually have scaled. One of the clearest signs you're stuck in the weeds is feeling that if I don't touch it, it won't be done right. Can you relate to that? That thought feels rational. It may even be true in the short term, but in the long term, it's exactly what prevents growth, both your growth and your team's growth. Getting out of the weeds starts with asking a different question, and that is, what work should only I be doing? At more senior levels, that list is surprisingly short. It usually includes setting direction and priorities, making decisions when trade-offs exist, aligning stakeholders with competing interests, hiring and developing people so they can operate independently, and anticipating risks and surfacing them early. If your week is dominated by tasks that don't fall into those categories, you are misallocating your time. Not because you're inefficient, but because you are over-functioning. The next shift is learning how to delegate complete outcomes, not just tasks, as scary as that may sound. Many people think they're delegating when they're really just offloading steps. They'll say things like, do this analysis, or send this email, or build this deck. Then they hover, correct, and redo because the work doesn't quite match what they would have done. That creates two problems. First, it keeps you stuck in the weeds. Second, it trains your team not to think and even suggests to them that you don't trust them, that it has to be your way or the highway. Delegating outcomes sounds different. It's like, here's the outcome we need to drive. Here's what success looks like. Here are the constraints and non-negotiables. Here's when we'll check in. Then, after saying that, what do? You step back. This approach requires upfront clarity, and patience. You will not get perfect execution immediately, and sometimes perfect can look like a lot of different things, not just the way you would have done it. Perfection isn't the point. The point is building the capability so that every bit of work no longer requires you. Another reason people struggle to get out of the weeds is this fear of losing control. Control feels comforting because it reduces uncertainty. But leadership isn't about control. It's about confidence in the system you have built. If everything relies on you, leadership won't trust you with more scope. They'll worry about burnout, bottlenecks, and fragility. Ironically, the more indispensable you make yourself, the less promotable you become. A powerful reframe is thinking about your job as not being to prevent mistakes, but to create conditions where mistakes don't become disasters. That means setting clear expectations, creating feedback loops, checking in at milestones instead of constantly, and letting people learn within guardrails. This is how leaders scale. Another place where weeds hide, your calendar. Many leaders are in meetings by default because they've always been there, because it feels polite, or because they're worried that they'll miss something or something will go wrong without them. Over time, their calendar fills with meetings that don't require their presence, and leadership work gets squeezed into the margins. To get out of the weeds, you have to audit your calendar honestly and often. And even if you can't change it, be aware of what the reality is. Ask yourself, am I in this meeting to make a decision or just to stay informed? Could someone else attend and brief me afterward? Am I actually the bottleneck because information lives with me? Am I disempowering others because I'm insisting on going to every meeting? The meetings you step out of are opportunities to invest in higher leverage work. Thinking, planning, coaching, aligning. Another subtle but important factor here is emotional ownership. Many people in the weeds are carrying more emotional responsibility than their role truly requires, or that anybody expects of them. They feel responsible for everyone's stress, moods, and outcomes. They step in to smooth things over, absorb tension, and protect others from discomfort. While well-intentioned, this behavior reinforces dependency. It keeps the system centered on you in ways that don't serve you. Leadership requires letting others feel appropriate discomfort so they too can grow. That does not mean being unsupportive. It just means not rescuing people from every challenge that they may not even need or want to be rescued from. One of the most necessary skills is tolerating good enough. If your standard for delegation is exactly how I would do it, you will never leave the weeds. Good enough at the team level often produces better outcomes than perfection at the individual level, not only because it frees you to focus on leverage, but because ideas may emerge or ways of working may emerge that are just as good, if not better than what you would have done. They're just different from what you would have done. But if you've been the fixer for a long time, people may expect you to continue that role. You may need to explicitly tell them, I'm focusing more on enabling my team to own this, or I'll step in at decision points rather than execution, or I'm shifting toward oversight and coaching here. These statements don't signal disengagement. They signal maturity and your ability to lead at scale. Finally, you have to understand that getting out of the weeds isn't about doing less. It's about doing what only you can do, because that is where you will differentiate yourself. Leaders who successfully make this shift don't become detached, they become more intentional. They stop confusing activity with impact. They build systems that can run without their constant intervention, which means more happens and it happens better. And that's exactly what organizations look for when deciding who gets more scope, more influence, and more opportunity.